The Ember Chronicles Part 14 of the Galactic War Saga. Shadows at the Threshold. Prologue. Darkness did not wait. It swallowed the remnants of the battlefield whole, sweeping across the fractured sky like ink spilling over shattered glass. The last star above the smoldering ruin flickered once, then vanished into the yawning void. Kaelin's breath hung ragged in the thinning air. His hand, still trembling from the wound carved into his side, clutched the relic tighter. The Starborn Veil pulsed once, slow, deliberate, as if aware it had been claimed. Beneath the dying light, the horizon split, not from flame, not from lightning, but from something older, something vast. A sound rose, not a roar, not a scream, but an echo that seemed to come from before sound existed at all. It scraped along the marrow, each note laced with an ancient authority that promised only one thing. Submission. The ground buckled. Cities, what was left of them, slid toward a growing maw in the earth. Towers crumbled like wet sand as gravity bent toward the rift, pulling not just matter, but light itself. In the darkness beyond the wound in the world, something stirred. Two shapes, two eyes, two wills. They moved in unison, yet not as one. One was cold as the first shadow ever cast. The other burned with the heat of creation's first spark. Kaelin stumbled backward, the veil thrumming in time with his heart. He did not know whether it was trying to protect him or summon them. A voice, not one, but two, spoke without words. Kulme. And then the world ended again. Chapter 1. The Breath Before the End. The rift was no longer a wound in the sky. It was an open mouth breathing. It exhaled heat and light in great, pulsing waves, then drew it back in with a whisper that rattled stone and bone alike. Kaelin could feel it in the hollow of his chest, as though the void beyond had reached into him and claimed the rhythm of his heartbeat. All around him, the battlefield had gone still. The ascendant warships hung in fractured formations above the shattered world, their hulls scarred and scorched, their weapons dark. The ground itself had split into yawning chasms where molten rivers churned, casting an amber glow over the wreckage of towers that had once been temples to the Starborn. The veil, woven across his shoulders like a living mantle, shimmered faintly in the glare. It was no longer the soft, luminous weave it had been when he first took it. Now, it was restless, each thread vibrating like a plucked string, answering some silent call from beyond the breach. Every pulse of the rift made it tighten against him, as if try to pull him closer. He had felt power before, raw, ascendant power that could bend stone or unmake flesh, but this was different. This was the weight of an intelligence that had been awake when stars were young, something that had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations and still found the will to reach into this place. Now, for him. The first shadow had spoken only once before vanishing back into the darkness. You're not ready to stand where the threshold begins. Yet it had not taken the veil from him. It could have. He knew it could have. A voice broke through the heavy silence, ragged and hoarse. Kaelin turned. Atara stood a few paces away, one hand pressed against her side where crimson had soaked through her armor. Her face was pale, but her eyes, those unyielding, storm-gray eyes, were locked on him. You feel it too, she said, not as a question, but a truth. Kaelin gave a slow nod. It's like it's breathing with me. She limped forward, her gaze shifting to the rift's spiraling core. The colors inside were wrong. Blue's too deep to be water, gold's too hot to be fire, streaks of black that swallowed light instead of casting shadow. That's not just the threshold opening, Atara murmured. That's the other side looking back. A shudder ran through the ground, and for a heartbeat the molten rivers froze mid-flow, as though the world itself had forgotten how to move. The silence deepened into something oppressive, pressing down on Kaelin's thoughts until the only thing he could hear was the steady thrum of the veil. Then it spoke, not aloud, not in any tongue he had learned, but in the raw, unshaped form of thought before language. A single idea. Kulme. Kaelin staggered, clutching at the veil's edges as the sensation tore through him. For an instant he was nowhere. No air, no ground, no time. Only the vast expanse of the void. Shapes moved there, some so large they bent the darkness around them, others so small they slipped through cracks in the fabric of thought. At the center, two presences faced one another across an endless gulf. One wreathed in light, so bright it scalded the mind. The other in shadow, so complete it erased the memory of form. The first light, the first shadow. The war between them was not one of swords or ships, but of reality itself, each reshaping the void to push the other further from the threshold. Kaelin's knees buckled as the vision snapped away. He found himself kneeling in the ash, the veil trembling against his skin like a living thing desperate to run. Atara crouched beside him, her voice low. "What did you see?" He shook his head slowly. Not yet. The words wouldn't come, not in a way she could understand. A deep hum rolled across the battlefield, and Kaelin looked up in time to see one of the Ascendant warships. Its hull marked with the sigils of the ecliptic throne, break formation and tilt toward the surface. A moment later its lower decks opened like a maw, and a column of shimmering light stabbed downward, dissolving debris as it descended. Figures emerged within it. Not soldiers. Not exactly. These moved with the surety of those who believed themselves untouchable. Cloaked in half-armor and ceremonial black, they wore no visible weapons. Only the glimmer of Ascendant script carved into the metal plates along their forearms. At their head was a woman Kaelin recognized instantly. Lysara, Speaker of the Nine. Her face was sharp enough to cut stone, her eyes lit by the cold fire of someone who had bargained with powers beyond mortal reach. "Kaelin of the Veil," she called, her voice carrying across the ruin like a blade drawn from its sheath. "The Nine would speak with you." He did not rise. "The Nine have spoken enough in my lifetime." She stepped from the beam, boots touching molten stone that cooled to obsidian beneath her feet. "And yet here you are, alive only because the Veil chose not to unmake you when it should have." The Nine wished to know why. Atara's hand hovered near the hilt of her blade. "You can tell the Nine, they can choke on their own." Kaelin cut her off with a glance. "Not now." He stood, the veil stirring as though sensing the weight of the moment. The rift pulsed again behind him, its breath warmer, closer. Lysara's eyes flicked to it. "You cannot keep standing between worlds," she said. "The threshold opens for someone. If it is not you, it will be the one strong enough to take what you've been given." Kaelin's answer came without thought. "Then I'll make sure no one else survives to take it." For the first time, Lysara smiled. Not with warmth. Never with warmth, but with the satisfaction of someone who had just confirmed her calculations. "Then we understand one another," she said. "The threshold will not wait forever. Neither will I." She turned, her cloak catching the rift's unnatural light before she vanished back into the column. The beam retracted, and the warship drifted away, leaving only the echo of her voice in Kaelin's mind. The veil's thrum deepened, matching the rift's pulse until they were one. Kaelin felt the choice tightening around him like a closing fist. Step forward, and he would cross into the place no Starborn had returned from. Step back, and he would leave the threshold to whatever force claimed it first. Atara touched his shoulder, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Whatever's waiting in there, it's been waiting a long time." Kaelin nodded once, staring into the rift's impossible colors. "Then it can wait a little longer." But even as he said it, the veil's threads tightened again, whispering the single word that had begun this descent. Kulme. Chapter 2. Echoes of the First Light. The silence after the rift's collapse was not quiet at all. It throbbed with a strange pressure, as though the void itself still rang from the final shattering of its tether to the living universe. A lingering vibration hummed against the hull of the Eidolon, and Kaelin could feel it in the marrow of his bones. The crew moved in muted urgency, each step echoing across the bridge as if the ship itself were holding its breath. Beyond the viewing panels, space twisted. What had been a smooth black expanse was now rippled like water caught in slow-motion waves. The rift's edges had not sealed. They had hardened, calcified into jagged arcs of light, like glass cracked but refusing to fall apart. The center remained a frozen storm of colorless lightning, reaching and retracting in patterns too deliberate to be random. It was not dead. It was waiting. Taran, hunched over the sensor station, muttered under his breath as his hands danced across the controls. Kaelin stepped behind him, scanning the spiraling data. He saw it instantly. The interference pattern was not fading. It was growing denser, the frequency harmonics aligning towards some repeating sequence. The rift was speaking in a language none of their translators could catch. Lisa entered from the starboard access, her armor still pitted with dust from the last ground fall. She didn't look at anyone before speaking. The surface on the other side is gone. Not destroyed, erased. No debris field, no atmosphere remnants. Just a smear of light, like the planet had been smeared off reality with a single stroke. Kaelin turned slowly to face her. Erased meant something different to them than destroyed. It was cleaner, colder. It was a wound without blood. Taran leaned back in his seat, eyes still fixed on the readings. Whatever did, that didn't come from inside the rift. It came through it. That's what the data says. Like the rift was a doorway, and now something's walking around in our house. No one spoke for a moment. The hum through the hull deepened, a bass note that made Kaelin's teeth ache. Somewhere deep in the ship, a bulkhead creaked like old timber under strain. He turned toward the viewing panels again. In the distance, 3 pale shapes drifted in slow arcs around the frozen storm. They were not ships in any recognizable form. Each was a long crescent of metallic bone, pulsing faintly along their spines. No heat signature, no engine trails. They moved as if they were being drawn in slow orbits by a center of gravity that was not there. Ascendant relics. Kaelin's mind raced back to the archives, to the forbidden sections of the Leviathan logs that the Council swore had been purged. He remembered the diagrams, sketches, not scans, drawn by hands that had trembled when they were made. The crescents had been seen only twice in recorded history, both times in the wake of a celestial extinction event. Both times, they had vanished before any could approach them. The bridge lights dimmed for a fraction of a second. Taran's voice cracked with sudden alarm. They're pinging us. Not with comms, with whatever they use. We're getting a return pulse that's not sound, not light, not even in the EM spectrum. But the ship's picking it up anyway. Lisa's hand went to her weapon. What does it mean? Kaelin could only answer with the truth. It means they know we're here. The ship groaned again, louder this time, the deck plates trembling underfoot. The hum had turned into a heartbeat, slow but impossibly strong. Kaelin realized it wasn't coming from the rift or the relics. It was coming from inside him. The pulse was sinking to his own, matching and then overpowering it until he felt as if his heart no longer belonged to him at all. A voice, not heard but felt, slipped into the edges of his awareness. You have seen the veil. You will not pass unmarked. Kaelin staggered, gripping the edge of the helm station. Around him, the crew had frozen in place, eyes glazed, each of them breathing in perfect unison as if some invisible hand had taken hold of their lungs. The panels flickered, then surged with symbols that none of them had entered. Angular patterns danced in fractal progression, rearranging themselves faster than thought. Taran's voice was thin, almost a whisper. They're mapping us. Every thought, every memory. It's in my head. Kaelin forced himself to focus, to push back against the rising tide in his mind. The voice, or the presence, pressed harder, but he anchored himself to the one thing it could not take, the memory of the first light. The moment in his youth when he had stood on the fractured plains of Elisir and watched the sun breach the horizon through a sky laced with firestorms. That sunrise had meant survival, and survival was still his answer now. The hum faltered, just slightly, but enough for him to seize control of his breath again. He barked orders, not aloud, but through the shared neural link of the bridge crew. Sever the auxiliary link to the rift. Lock out the transspectral receivers. cut the hard line to the NAV core. One by one, the crew blinked free of the trance. Taran slumped forward, hands trembling, but his fingers still found the kill switches. Lisa staggered to the comm station and cut the primary feed to the deep-range beacon. The lights steadied. The heartbeat faded, but the relics had moved, no longer drifting. The crescents were now aligned in perfect equidistance, forming the 3 points of a vast triangle around the Eidolon. They pulsed brighter now, each beat matching the rift's frozen lightning in unnatural harmony. Kaelin felt the shape of it, not physically, but in his mind's horizon. The relics were not just surrounding them. They were weaving something. A field. A net. The rift flared just once. For the briefest heartbeat, Kaelin saw through it and wished he hadn't. A city of impossible height and breadth sprawled beyond, built not for human scale, but for something vast and slow. Towers that curved like the ribs of ancient titans. Bridges of light that pulsed with the steady rhythm of blood in veins. Shapes moved through the city, half seen, each one more shadow than form, each radiating the same cold presence that had touched his mind. Then it was gone. The rift was still frozen. The relics pulsed, and the hum in his bones returned, softer this time, almost patient. Kaelin forced his voice steady. Bring weapons online. Lisa hesitated. Against those? He didn't answer. Some orders were not given because they made sense. They were given because the alternative was to stand still while the void decided your fate. Taran's hands flew over the controls. The weapon capacitors began to charge. The hum from the relics did not waver. The rift's lightning danced in patterns that were starting to look deliberate. Kaelin knew then that this was not a random encounter. This was a summons. The first light had always been a beginning. This time it might be an end. Chapter 3. The Untitled. The corridors of the Starborn flagship whispered with a hum that was not entirely mechanical. Somewhere deep in the structure, the living alloys breathed, metal that had once been a creature and still carried its dormant heartbeat. Eric had grown used to that sound over the years, but tonight it felt heavier, more insistent, like a pulse pounding through the deck. He moved alone, his boots barely making a sound on the pale silver floors, his mind dragging behind him a trail of ghosts. This ship was not just a vessel. It was a monument to every war that had carved their path. And every echo in these walls pulled him backward, to the moment he first stood aboard a burning freighter in the wake of the Ashfall War, watching the sky tear apart in fire. To the Leviathan's gate, its impossible geometry etched in his nightmares, a rift that had swallowed a third of his fleet in a single heartbeat. To the shadowed vaults of the Forgotten, where the light of his torch had fallen on names he'd sworn to protect, carved into the stone like accusations. They were all here with him, even if no one else could see them. The central chamber loomed ahead, its ceiling rising like the inside of some vast cathedral. Starborn design always made him uneasy. They didn't build rooms, they cultivated them. The chamber seemed to grow from the ship's spine, curving into smooth, bone-white pillars that disappeared into darkness above. The veil device floated in the center, suspended within a frame of glimmering stasis threads. Even after weeks of study, it refused to yield its nature. Every scan came back as paradox, neither solid nor energy, present yet absent, as if the object only partially existed here. Celine was already there, standing in the pale glow that radiated from the device. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes followed the pulsing light like it was speaking to her alone. "You've been staring at it for hours," Eric said quietly. Her voice was flat. "It stares back." He stepped closer, feeling the prickling on his skin as he neared the containment field. The hum of the ship seemed to shift, syncing with the veil's rhythm, and for a moment he could almost swear he heard whispers in the back of his mind. "This isn't like the relics we've handled before," Celine continued. "This is older, much older, and it isn't passive." Eric frowned. "Passive?" She turned toward him, and the look in her eyes carried the weight of a truth neither of them wanted to face. "It's aware." The word settled like a stone in his chest. He thought of Book 6. The rift technology the Leviathan had carried, tech so advanced it had been mistaken for magic. But even then, it had been inert machinery, waiting for input. This was something else entirely. Something that seemed to be waiting for them. He didn't want to ask the next question, but it was already in his mind. Waiting for us to do what? Celine's gaze shifted back to the veil. That's the wrong question. You should be asking what it wants us to do. A chill rippled through him. Before he could respond, the ship's comms crackled. Captain, you'd better get to the bridge. You need to see this. The bridge was awash in light from the forward displays, and every officer's attention was fixed on the central projection. An image hung there, a shifting field of energy in deep space, twisting and folding like a living storm. Recognition hit Eric hard. He'd seen this before. Back in Ashes of the Starborn, it had been a faint shimmer on the edge of their sensors, dismissed as spatial distortion. Years later, in Leviathan's Gate, it had appeared again, more defined, just before the rift had opened and swallowed his fleet. And now it was here, vast and undeniable. Sir, it's calling to us, the sensor officer said, her voice unsteady. Eric didn't answer right away. He was staring at the energy storm, feeling the same pulse he'd heard in the Veil chamber. It was the same rhythm, the same beat. It's linked, Celine murmured from behind him. The Veil and that whatever it is. They're connected. The officer's hands moved over the controls, bringing the readings into focus. And then the room went still. The storm wasn't just energy. There were structures inside it, shapes moving against the swirl of light. Massive, architectural forms. One of them, Eric realized with a cold knot in his gut, matched the design of the Starborn ruins they had uncovered in Shadows of the Forgotten. This isn't random, he said quietly. It's all been leading to this. Every relic, every fragment we've chased, it's been guiding us here. The next hours blurred into motion. Calculations, course plotting, weapons readiness checks. But beneath the mechanical preparation was the unspoken truth that no one wanted to say aloud. Whatever lay inside that storm was meant to be found, and it might not be willing to let them leave. As they approached, the hum of the ship deepened, almost harmonizing with the Veil's pulse. Some crew members began to feel pressure behind their eyes, faint headaches that built into throbbing pain. One collapsed outright. Celine leaned close to Eric at the command station. It's not just aware. It's reaching out, and I don't think it's reaching for me. The lights on the bridge dimmed for just a heartbeat, and every console flickered. Then on the central display, the storm shifted. For the first time, its swirling chaos parted, and a single, colossal eye stared back at them. It wasn't an eye in any human sense. It was a field of impossible light and shadow, folding in on itself, yet Eric knew it was looking at him. The Veil's pulse surged in sync with his own heartbeat. And in that instant, every loss he'd endured since the First War, every betrayal, every unanswered question from a dozen battles past, he felt them all coalesce into one truth. The thing in the storm knew him, and it had been waiting. Chapter 4. The jungle pressed in like a living wall, every leaf a blade, every vine a noose waiting to tighten. The air hung wet and heavy, tasting of iron and rot. Somewhere in the canopy, a flock of unseen birds burst away in frantic flight, their cries rising like an alarm before vanishing into the layered silence. Kaelin slowed, raising one gloved hand, and the squad melted into stillness. Their exosuits, matte black with faint streaks of heat dispersion plating, barely disturbed the undergrowth. The smell of scorched bark still clung to the air, the remnant of a plasma barrage from less than an hour ago. It wasn't a natural battle zone. This place had been hunted. Through the broken tree line ahead, the glimmer of water flickered. A swamp. Shallow, slick, dark. The kind that swallowed sound and turned every movement into a sluggish nightmare. They had to cross it. A low, thrumming vibration reached them first, traveling through the earth before the sound did. Kaelin felt it more than heard it, a deep, inhuman resonance that made his teeth ache. It was coming from across the swamp, somewhere beyond the tangled mangroves and mist. Leora moved to his side, her visor flashing tactical readings, then dimming again. Her voice was low, tense. This is where they went silent. This is where every patrol vanished. Kael nodded once. Then he signaled forward. The first step into the swamp sent cold muck rising halfway to his shins, a slow suction that wanted to keep him there. The rest of the squad followed, moving in staggered formation, rifles high. The water barely rippled, too still for a place that should have been alive with insects and frogs. Halfway through, the mist thickened, swallowing shapes and distances. That was when the first shadow moved. It was fast, too fast for something that size. A ripple in the water, then a towering shape rising just beyond the mist, half seen but massive, like bone and armor fused into a single terrible form. Its head tilted, clicking sounds carrying through the air. Kael froze, motioning the squad to hold. The thing didn't move closer. It just watched, its faintly glowing eyes fixed on them like lanterns in the fog. Then it sank straight down without a sound. That was worse than if it had attacked. The squad pushed forward faster now, knowing they were already in its territory. Every splash felt too loud, every heartbeat too slow. Kael kept his weapon ready, scanning the water for any sign of the thing's return. A tremor ran through the swamp bed. Then another. It wasn't behind them. It was under them. Leora shouted a warning just as the surface erupted. A column of black water and snapping tendrils surged upward, catching one of the soldiers, Rennick, around the waist. His scream was short before he was yanked beneath the surface, leaving only a churn of bubbles and blood. Kael fired, bursts of blue plasma boiling the water, but the thing was already moving, a blurred, serpentine mass beneath them. The swamp turned violent. Water churned, roots tore loose, and massive coils of slick muscle lashed out from below. Another soldier went down, pulled under with a muffled splash. Kael triggered his jump pack in a short burst, clearing a section of roots and landing on a moss-slick mound. Leora was beside him, rifle braced, firing into the shadows beneath the surface. For every shot they landed, the creature shifted, vanishing into the blind depths, only to strike again from a new angle. Kael realized the truth in an instant. They weren't fighting a creature. They were inside the hunting radius of several. Shapes moved in the fog behind them. The swamp became a killing ground. They didn't have the firepower to win here. Kael slammed a hand to his comm, opening the channel to the dropship pilot. Delta Team requesting immediate extraction at Waypoint Gamma. Hostile environment. Triple Class 7 signatures. The pilot's reply came sharp through the static. Copy inbound. You've got 90 seconds, Commander. 90 seconds might as well have been a lifetime down here. The squad formed a tight circle, weapons out, moving toward the far bank. The water surged around them, tendrils testing the perimeter, slapping against armor. Something massive slid beneath Kaelin's boots, the sheer size of it bending the swamp bed downward before drifting away. A soldier screamed, not from pain but warning. From the trees ahead, another shape emerged. This one wasn't in the water. It stepped forward on elongated limbs, armor plated with jagged ridges, its head split down the middle into two snarling mandibles. It carried a staff-like weapon crackling with violet arcs, and when it moved, the swamp listened. Kael recognized the posture, the command over the creatures below. Not a predator, a controller. The realization came with the first strike, a bolt of violet energy that slammed into the water, sending a shockwave through the swamp. Two soldiers collapsed instantly, armor scorched, water around them steaming. Kael didn't hesitate. Suppressive fire. He barked, voice raw, and the squad unleashed everything they had at the figure. It moved with impossible grace, dodging bursts, vaulting from one root to another. Each time it struck the water, the creatures below surged higher, more aggressive. The dropship roared in low overhead, its floodlights cutting through the mist, sending shadows scattering. The side hatch swung open, cables dropping into the clearing beyond the far bank. Go, Kaelin shouted, shoving Leora forward. She ran, firing bursts over her shoulder. The surviving soldiers followed, scrambling up the bank, clutching the cables as the dropship began to lift. The controller moved to intercept. Kaelin turned, emptying the rest of his charge into its chest. The armor cracked, violet light spilling from the fractures. It staggered but did not fall. Kaelin was the last to grab the cable. As the dropship pulled him clear of the water, the controller lunged upward, claws swiping just beneath his boots. The swamp was already fading into fog below when something else caught his eye, a faint shimmer at the edge of the waterline. A veil-like ripple in the air, almost invisible, pulsing faintly before vanishing. Leora saw it too. Neither of them said a word, but the same thought burned in both their minds. This wasn't just a swamp. It was a doorway. Chapter 5. Into the Teeth of the Rift. The rift roared like a living storm, its torn edges of reality folding inward, then snapping outward again as if the void itself were breathing. Draven's boots scraped against the fractured metal deck of the Vigilant Dawn as alarms bellowed from every wall panel. The starship groaned beneath the strain, hull plating flexing as gravitational distortions pulled at it from angles no sane engineer would dare calculate. The lights flickered dimmed, and in the blackness between flashes, something vast and unnatural shifted within the heart of the rift. The crew didn't need words to know what was happening. This was no random collapse of subspace. This was a presence. A sudden impact threw Draven forward. He caught himself on the edge of the command table, teeth grinding as the ship's inertial dampener struggled to keep pace with the violent pull of the rift. Gravity didn't just feel heavier. It changed direction, twisting the stomach in unnatural ways. The displays above the table sputtered and bled static, until a blurred image emerged, a jagged silhouette cutting across the void, moving with purpose toward them. A deep shudder passed through the Vigilant Dawn, the unmistakable vibration of something massive making contact. Metal screeched against metal, or perhaps something that only mimicked metal. The crew braced as sparks erupted from the ceiling conduits, raining molten droplets onto the deck. Lyra staggered to her station, fingers flying over controls that refused to obey. Engines were throttling down against her will. The system screamed warnings in red, locking out commands. She swore under her breath and yanked open a manual override, plunging her hands into the exposed wiring as if she could force the ship to obey through sheer will. The silhouette outside grew clearer. It wasn't a ship in the traditional sense. Its form was irregular, rippling as though made of liquid shadows wrapped around a jagged core of fractured starlight. Tendrils of that darkness extended outward, attaching themselves to the Vigilant Dawn's hull. Jalen's voice cut through the chaos, low and urgent. It's not trying to destroy us. It's trying to board. As if answering him, the first tendril punctured the forward hangar. The sound of air being sucked violently into the void echoed down the corridors, followed by the clanging of emergency bulkheads sealing in sequence. Somewhere deep in the ship, a fire suppression system triggered, releasing a cloud of supercooled gas that billowed through the hallways like phantom mist. Draven didn't wait for reports. He knew what was coming. These things, whatever they were, weren't mechanical invaders. They were alive. A pounding thud echoed from the portside airlock, then another, each impact stronger than the last. The deck underfoot vibrated, and then the hatch bent inward, warped by invisible pressure. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the metal tore in half as if it were cloth. Through the breach poured figures like nothing Draven had ever seen. Humanoid in outline, but impossibly wrong, their limbs too long, movements both graceful and predatory. Their eyes, or the faint suggestion of them, burned with a color that didn't exist in any natural spectrum. It wasn't just light. It was thought. The first of them lunged. Draven drew his sidearm, firing in a single motion. The plasma round hit dead center and passed through as though the thing were smoke. But it didn't simply pass. The smoke twisted, absorbed the energy, and the creature seemed to swell, its outline becoming more defined, more real. "Not good," Jalen said from somewhere to Draven's left, loosing a kinetic shot that at least staggered the next attacker. Physical rounds bit deeper than energy. The corridor became a blur of motion. Lyra yanked a floor hatch open, pulling a portable emitter from storage and tossing it to Draven. He caught it, slammed it to the deck, and activated the pulse barrier. A ring of translucent distortion shimmered outward, slowing the attackers but not stopping them entirely. They came on regardless, their limbs moving in unnerving silence, even as their shapes brushed against the barrier and left ripples in reality itself. The crew's weapons barked and hissed. Every shot aimed to push them back toward the breach. But the breach wasn't the only entry point anymore. Reports flooded in overcomms, secondary hangar compromised, engineering under assault, life support at 70% and dropping. The Vigilant Dawn wasn't just being attacked. It was being claimed. From the bridge's rear viewport, Draven caught sight of the rift again. Something else was emerging, taller, broader, a shadow given form, and yet it carried with it the unmistakable silhouette of armor. But it wasn't any celestial ascendant design. It was older, far older, and it was looking straight at him. His pulse hammered as a single thought, not his own, resonated inside his skull. Return what was taken. The barrier sputtered. One of the creatures surged through before the field could reform, slamming Draven to the deck. Its limbs pinned him effortlessly, but it didn't strike. Instead, its burning non-eyes studied him, and he felt an ache behind his own eyes as images flashed. Relics of impossible architecture beneath black seas, veils of light torn away to reveal something vast and asleep. Jalen's shot tore it away from him, sending it recoiling into the breach with a shriek like tearing stone. Draven staggered to his feet, breath ragged. "Seal that rift," he barked, though the words came out more like a growl. Lyra's hands blurred over the controls, feeding power to the ship's primary cannons. The Vigilant Dawn turned with a sluggish defiance, targeting the Shadow's core. The shot lit the void with a blast of pure stellar fire. For an instant, the rift's edges curled inward, and the creatures recoiled. But the larger armored figure did not move. Its presence pressed harder against Draven's mind. "You have crossed the veil. You will not leave." The temperature in the bridge dropped. Breath misted in the air. The glass of the forward viewport spiderwebbed from an unseen force, as though something were testing the strength of their reality. Draven didn't wait to see what happened next. "Full power to the engines," he ordered, and the Vigilant Dawn tore itself free from the tendrils, streaking away from the rift at a velocity that rattled every bolt in its frame. But as the blackness swallowed them, the image of that armored shadow burned in his thoughts. Not an enemy he could kill. Not yet. But one that knew exactly who they were and where they would run. And it would follow. Chapter 6. The Maw of the Fracture. The deck trembled beneath Kaelin's boots as the transport skimmed the ragged edge of the rift. Outside the viewport, reality bled into chaos. Bands of light twisting into impossible shapes, shadows tearing loose from the void, coiling like serpents around the hull. The rift was never still, never passive. It hunted. The warning klaxons blared again, shrill and urgent, forcing Kaelin to tighten his grip on the safety rail. The pilot's voice crackled over the comm, ragged with strain. "Hull stress at 92%. We can't hold here much longer." "Hold," Kaelin barked, eyes fixed on the shape emerging ahead. Through the warped light of the rift, something massive drifted into view. At first, it looked like a shattered moon. Then the contours sharpened, revealing a fractured fortress adrift between worlds. The Maw of the Fracture, the Ascendant stronghold whispered about in every shadowed corner of the Resistance. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But retreat meant the relic would be lost, and without it, the war would tip irrevocably in the enemy's favor. Isla stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the swirling madness outside. "You realize," she said softly, "that this thing is not dead. It's watching us." Kael didn't answer. He didn't have to. The sensation was undeniable. The oppressive weight of an ancient mind pressing against theirs, probing, measuring. A sudden spike on the scanners cut through the tension. Multiple contacts inbound. The pilot shouted. They just came out of the rift behind us. Kael didn't need the display to know what was coming. The Ascendant Sentinels, the Riftborn war machines, were closing fast, their shapes flickering like mirages, each one wrapped in a haze of shifting light. Weapons ready, he ordered. Isla with me. They moved down the narrow passage to the rear of the ship, where a reinforced bulkhead split open to reveal the weapons bay. The air was hot, tinged with the sharp tang of charge capacitors. Outside, the Sentinel struck. The first impact slammed into the transport's flank, the force rattling every bolt in the ship. Kael was thrown sideways, catching himself against the bulkhead. Isla wasn't so lucky. She hit the deck hard, her breath knocked from her lungs. He hauled her up just as a second blow reverberated through the hull. The pilot's voice cracked again over the comm shields are bleeding out. I can't keep them off. Kaelin's gaze locked with Isla's. We make a stand here. If they breach us before we hit the fortress, this is over. He keyed the release, and the rear hatch cycled open, flooding the bay with the cold, unsteady glow of the rift. The Sentinels were close now. Massive, angular constructs with limbs that bent wrong, their metallic hides shifting between phases of existence. Kael leveled his rifle and fired. The burst tore through the first Sentinel, but it didn't fall. It simply reformed, the rift's energy knitting it back together in an instant. They're pulling energy from the rift itself. Isla shouted over the roar. We can't kill them here. Then we drive them into the maw, Kael said. Inside, the rift's flow will be weaker. They lose their edge. The ship shuddered as another strike slammed into the rear plating. Warning lights flashed red across the bay. Hang on, the pilot snarled over comms. I'm taking us in. The transport surged forward, engines screaming in protest as the rift's gravity wells fought to drag them off course. The Sentinels followed, twisting and darting through the warped void like predators closing on prey. The maw loomed ahead, vast gates of black metal fused into jagged, unwelcoming shapes. They were open, but only just the gap barely wide enough for the transport to slip through. Kael braced himself as the pilot threaded the ship into the breach. The moment they crossed the threshold, the sensation of being watched deepened, a cold pressure crawling up his spine. The fortress was alive, and it knew they were here. Inside, the light changed. The shifting madness of the rift faded into a dim, reddish haze that clung to the walls like fog. The interior was cavernous, lined with towering structures that might have once been spires but now sagged under the weight of centuries. The Sentinels poured in behind them. Kael didn't wait. He vaulted from the transport, rifle up, laying down suppressive fire as Isla followed. The Sentinels' movements were slower now, their bodies flickering with instability. They're vulnerable, Isla called. Kaelin's shots found their marks this time. Shards of the Sentinel's armor exploding into the air, its form collapsing into a heap of inert metal. The others hesitated, their movements stuttering as the fortress's gravity pressed against them. A voice, not through comms, not through any physical medium, slid into Kaelin's mind. You bring the relics sent into my domain. Fool! His vision blurred, the walls seeming to close in around him. Isla's hand gripped his shoulder, grounding him, but the pressure didn't ease. The fortress was speaking directly to him. You will not leave. The deck beneath them split open. Kael and Isla dropped instinctively, just as jagged pillars of black steel erupted upward, sealing the hangar's entrance. The transport was trapped outside. From the darkness ahead, something stirred, a colossal figure of shifting stone and metal, eyes burning with a pale, unnatural light. This wasn't just a guardian. This was the Maw's made flesh. It moved, and the air itself bent around it. Kael raised his weapon, but in the pit of his stomach he knew the truth. This was no battle they could win. Not yet. The fortress's voice came again, colder, final. Step forward, bearer of the veil, and be unmade. Chapter 7. Shattered in the silence. The storm had broken hours ago, but the air was still sharp with the scent of scorched metal and ozone. Ash drifted through the ruined corridors like restless snow, caught in the flicker of failing lights. Every step along the shattered deck felt like a trespass against something ancient and wounded. Kael kept his grip tight on the plasma rifle, eyes darting to every shadow, every hanging cable swaying like a viper ready to strike. The Starborn Veil had not given up its secrets easily. They had fought for every corridor, every sealed bulkhead, every step deeper into its silent heart. And they were no closer to understanding why this derelict felt more alive than dead. Rhea was ahead of him, moving with the kind of precision only honed through decades of survival. Her visor reflected the occasional sparks cascading from a ruptured conduit. Her voice came over the comms, low but edged with tension. "We've got movement. Left junction. Small. Fast." Kael froze. He had heard it too, a metallic scrape followed by the faint, wet clicking of something not entirely mechanical. The sound carried with it a pulse, almost like a heartbeat, echoing through the bones of the ship. Then came the whisper. It wasn't over the comms. It wasn't coming from in front of him. It was inside his mind, a breath against his thoughts. "You do not belong." He spun, sweeping the rifle toward the darkness behind. Nothing. Only the corridor collapsing into blackness beyond the reach of their helmet lights. "I heard it," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Rhea's tone shifted. "Heard what?" Before he could answer, the corridor to their left erupted in motion. Something darted out, a blur of silver and black, limbs bending at impossible angles, eyes like molten amber. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, vanishing into an access shaft with an almost playful swiftness. Kaelin's heart hammered. That wasn't Starborn tech. "No, it wasn't," Rhea replied, "which means it's either been here far longer or far more recently." The walls themselves seemed to groan. Metal plates shifted under unseen strain. The sound reminded him of a ship flexing during atmospheric entry, but they were deep in the void. The Starborn Veil was moving, changing, reshaping its insides around them. Navigation pings failed. The schematics they had uploaded were now useless. Corridors didn't match. Bulkheads had appeared where none had been minutes ago. "The Veil doesn't want us leaving," Kael said. They reached a junction where the bulkhead had torn open to space. But instead of the stars, there was only a swirling wall of faintly luminous mist. It moved like a living thing, pressing against the fracture, holding vacuum at bay. The mist shimmered faintly, and Kael thought he could see shapes moving within it. Tall, angular, alien silhouettes. Rhea's voice lowered further. "This isn't containment tech. This is something else." The whisper returned, stronger this time. Not just a voice, but a presence pressing against the edges of their minds. "Turn back," it said, but the words carried no malice, only inevitability. Kael shook his head as if that could dislodge the sound. His fingers itched on the trigger. "We keep moving." They pushed on through the right corridor, where the light failed entirely. Darkness here wasn't simply the absence of light. It had weight, texture like a thick fluid that resisted their movement. Even their helmet beams struggled to cut through it. The illumination swallowed within a meter. Something was breathing in the dark. Slow, measured. Kael raised his weapon. Rhea stopped moving. The breathing didn't come closer. It was simply everywhere at once. A pale shape coalesced ahead of them. Not quite humanoid, not quite solid. It rippled like a reflection on moving water. The form tilted its head at an unnatural angle, and though it had no face, Kael was certain it was looking at him. The whisper shifted, not in words this time, but in an emotion that wasn't his own. Curiosity, hunger. Kael took a single step forward. The figure dissolved instantly, the darkness folding back, and when it returned, the corridor ahead had changed again. They were no longer in a ship corridor. This was an open expanse. Stone pathways suspended over a void of infinite black, lit only by distant, drifting lights like frozen stars. Rhea's breath caught. We've crossed into an overlay dimension. This isn't possible without a rift engine. Kael scanned their surroundings, but his stomach turned at the realization. There was no visible entrance behind them anymore. No hatch, no wall, only the same stone path stretching endlessly in both directions. The presence in their minds deepened. "You sought the veil," it said. "Now you will wear it." And then the darkness moved. Shapes began emerging from the black, dozens at first, then hundreds. Each one bore fragments of armor, weapons, or strange crystalline growths. None moved like machines. None breathed like humans. Kael backed toward Rhea, feeling the stone path tremble beneath them. The massive figures began to advance, and with each step, the star-like lights above dimmed, plunging the expanse further into shadow. "There's no way out," Rhea said. "Not without giving it what it wants." The whisper filled his mind entirely now. A trade, a life for a passage. Before Kael could respond, one of the figures lunged forward, closing the distance in an instant, claws outstretched. He fired point-blank, plasma burning through its form, but instead of collapsing, it split apart into two identical shapes, both reaching for him. The path began to collapse behind them, stone slabs tumbling into the void. Kael didn't need to be told. They ran. But as they fled, the voice spoke again, its tone almost gentle now. "You cannot outrun the veil." The stone ahead cracked and split wide, revealing not the black void, but an image, a perfect reflection of the ship they had entered from. Their crew stood there, unaware, laughing, speaking alive. But Kael knew instantly it was a lie. Behind him, the footsteps multiplied. The air thickened until every movement felt like wading through tar. The whisper became a roar inside his head. The last thing Kael saw before the stone gave way beneath him was Rhea's visor turning toward him, her eyes wide, but not with fear, with realization. And then they were falling. Chapter 8: Descent into the Veil. Kaelin's body tumbled through the endless dark, weightless yet falling with a velocity that twisted his senses. The cold pressed against his skin, biting and relentless, yet there was no air, no wind. Only the endless void folding around him like a suffocating shroud. A sharp jolt ripped through his consciousness. He slammed onto cold metal, breath gasping, heart pounding in rhythm with a heavy silence. The starry expanse vanished, replaced by the harsh hum of the Starborn Veil's inner hull. The walls around him pulsed faintly, alive with residual power, faint glyphs flickering beneath the surfaces like dormant stars waking. Rhea was beside him, her face pale beneath the cracked visor of her helmet. She pushed herself up, fingers brushing her bleeding arm. Neither spoke. Words felt useless against the weight of what had just occurred. The Veil was not simply a ship or artifact. It was a living labyrinth, an echo of ancient powers beyond comprehension. Kael struggled to his feet, every muscle trembling. The corridor they had fallen into was unfamiliar. Its steel plates warped and twisted as if the ship's core itself breathed and shifted. The very air thrummed with a resonance that unsettled the bones. "We can't stay here," Kael said, voice rough. "The Veil's trying to trap us in its own nightmare." Rhea scanned their surroundings, her fingers flying over her wrist console. The spatial maps are corrupt. The paths don't exist in any logical form. It's warping reality itself. Kaelin's mind raced back to the vision. The crew they had seen, the false reality the Veil conjured to lure and confuse. If we don't break free, we'll be trapped in this fold forever. Just like those echoes. The whispers had returned. Not faint now, but a chorus, layered and shifting, pressing on their minds with impossible weight. The voices spoke in the language of the Ascendants, a melody older than stars. "Choose," they intoned. "Sacrifice for salvation, or fade into the void." Kael exchanged a glance with Rhea. They were running out of options and time. With cautious steps, they navigated the twisted corridors, where walls shimmered between solid steel and translucent veils of light. Flickering glyphs pulsed beneath their feet, casting eerie shadows that danced and shifted as if alive. Every turn led deeper into the Veil's enigma. Memories, some theirs, some not, washed over them unbidden. Faces from the past, long-lost friends, haunting regrets. Kaelin stumbled, nearly overwhelmed by the tide of emotion. Rhea steadied him, her voice firm. "Hold on. We're not alone in this fight." They pressed forward until they reached a chamber unlike any before. A cathedral of light and shadow, suspended in impossible geometry. At its center floated the Ascendant artifact, radiating power that seemed to ripple through space itself. A hologram flickered to life, a spectral figure robed in ancient garb, eyes glowing with ethereal fire. The Ascendant Elder spoke without words, but the message was clear. The artifact was a nexus of creation and destruction, a force bound by sacrifice and will. Power comes at a cost, the Elder's presence conveyed. Those who seek to wield it must be willing to pay in full. Kaelin's grip tightened around his weapon. The Veil was no longer merely a prison or a battleground. It was a crucible, testing the very limits of their resolve and sacrifice. Behind them, the corridors began to pulse violently, the ship's heartbeat accelerating. The Veil was awakening fully, and with it, a storm unlike any before. Kaelin exchanged a determined glance with Rhea. Whatever the cost, they would face it because the fate of the galaxy hinged on the choices made within the heart of the Starborn Veil. Chapter 9. Echoes of the Ascendants. The cathedral chamber dissolved around them, replaced by endless shifting corridors that pulsed with the Veil's living essence. Each step Kaelin and Rhea took sent ripples across the walls, as if the ship was responding to their presence, aware, sentient, judging. Kaelin's mind buzzed with fragments of memory that weren't his own. Faces of Ascendant warriors, their voices etched into the fabric of the Veil's consciousness. Warnings buried in forgotten languages whispered truths long lost to time. Rhea's wrist console crackled, struggling to maintain coherence amid the fluctuating spatial data. "We're near the core," she said, voice tight. "This is where the artifact's power anchors the ship. If we can reach it, maybe we can control it or destroy it." Kaelin's fingers brushed the scar beneath his collarbone, a mark left by the Ascendant energy during their last encounter. The Veil's power had etched itself into him, binding his fate to the relic's ancient will. They rounded a corner and stepped into the heart of the Veil, a vast chamber suspended between dimensions. The walls were covered with crystalline structures that hummed with radiant light, casting prisms that fractured reality itself. Hovering in the center was the rift-born relic, its surface shimmering with energy that pulsed like a living star. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a nexus of creation and destruction, a weapon forged in the forgotten fires of Ascendant might. Before Kaelin could approach, the hologram of the Ascendant Elder appeared again, more vivid than before. His eyes burned with an otherworldly intensity. Those who seek to wield the Ascendant relic must understand its truth. It is not merely power. It is sacrifice. To command it, one must relinquish all that anchors them to the past. The chamber trembled as the Veil's energy surged. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, figures emerging from the darkness, remnants of the Starforged Children cult, fanatics bent on reshaping the galaxy with the relic's power. Kaelin raised his weapon as they advanced, their eyes gleaming with zealotry and madness. "You won't control this relic," he vowed. "Not while we stand." A fierce battle erupted, plasma fire against spectral blades, the clash of wills echoing across the dimension-warped chamber. Rhea moved with lethal precision, covering Kaelin's flank as they fought back wave after wave of cultists. Amid the chaos, Kaelin's mind flickered back to the warnings of Admiral Karath and the echoes of the Riftborn legacy. The Starforged throne was more than a seat of power. It was a crucible of destinies intertwined across eons. As the last cultist fell, a hush settled over the chamber. The relic pulsed stronger, responding to their presence, offering both a promise and a curse. Kael reached out, fingers trembling as he touched the relic's surface. A searing light engulfed him, visions flashing, ancient wars, ascended beings, and a future rewritten by choices yet to come. The veil whispered one final truth. To save the galaxy, they would have to become what they feared most. Chapter 10. The Veil's Reckoning. The chamber's light pulsed in rhythm with Kaelin's pounding heart as he held the ascendant relic in his hands. Its power surged through him, a raw, burning current that threatened to consume his very soul. Around him, the crystalline walls vibrated, casting shards of fractured light that twisted and writhed like living things. Rhea stood close, eyes wide with both awe and fear. "This power," she said quietly, voice trembling, "it's beyond anything we've ever faced. It's alive." Kael swallowed hard. The visions from the relic haunted him, flashes of ancient wars, ascendant beings wielding creation and destruction, and the price they paid for such power. The veil was more than a prison or weapon. It was a test, a crucible designed to shape the fate of the galaxy. Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently, a deep rumble that shook the very foundations of the Starborn Veil. Warning sirens blared, lights flickered, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like a living heart in distress. Containment fields failing, Rhea shouted over the din. The relic's energy is destabilizing the veil. If we don't act fast, Kael clenched his jaw. There was no turning back. The only way to save the galaxy, to prevent the veil from tearing itself apart, was to wield the relic's power, to become the crucible's master. He closed his eyes, focusing on the surging energy coursing through him. Memories of the star-forged throne, the ascendants, the rift-born legacy all merged into a singular purpose. With a roar that echoed through the corridors, Kael unleashed the relic's power, shaping it with will alone. Waves of energy radiated outward, stabilizing the fracturing veil, sealing rifts that threatened to swallow entire star systems. But power exacts a price. As Kael poured himself into the artifact's control, the visions returned, darker, deeper. Faces twisted in agony, realms consumed by fire and shadow. The Ascendant's final warning echoed through his mind. Sacrifice was the only path to salvation. Suddenly, a rift tore open in the heart of the chamber, a swirling vortex of darkness and light. From its depths emerged a figure, cloaked, radiating a terrible power that rivaled the relic itself. The Starforged Children's leader returned from the void, eyes blazing with vengeance and apocalyptic resolve. "You think you can contain the ascendant power?" The figure hissed, voice like grinding stars. "You are but a flicker against the storm to come." Kael stood firm, relic glowing fiercely in his grasp. "Then let the storm come. We will be the lightning that shatters the darkness." The chamber exploded into chaos, energy clashing with shadow, wills colliding in a battle that transcended time and space. Outside, the galaxy held its breath. The Starborn Veil's fate, and the fate of all who dwell beneath the stars, hung in the balance. And as the light and darkness tore at the very fabric of existence, one truth became undeniable. This war was far from over. It had only just begun. Don't forget to subscribe to follow along with the next part of this epic galactic war saga.